If this town had wanted Cale Turner dead, it could not have chosen a crueler way than making him ask for help first. By the time the last porch refused him, snow was already sealing the wheel ruts behind his broken truck. He stood at the edge of the main road with a duffel over one shoulder, while his German shepherd, Rook, watched the houses like they were human faces in a firing line. The first porch had belonged to a gray-bearded rancher who cracked the door only wide enough to say, "Not tonight," and shut it before Cale could answer. The second belonged to a woman holding a baby on one hip. She looked at Rook first, then at the storm behind Cale, and her fear was so plain it was almost honest. The third house pretended nobody was home, though Cale saw the curtain move. The fourth was worse, because a deputy's helper came all the way onto the porch, stared at the dog, and said, "If he freezes on one spot, you keep walking. Don't dig. Don't wait. Just keep walking." Cale had asked what that meant, but the young man only backed into the lightless doorway and shut him out. After that there were no more porches, only dark windows, bad weather, and a town that somehow looked guilty without saying a word. Cale should have left then. A smarter man might have turned back toward the highway, climbed into his dead truck, and burned the last of his diesel trying not to freeze before daylight. But smarter men were not usually carrying the kind of damage Cale carried. 3 years earlier, on a black water extraction in Eastern Europe, he had watched a bridge fail under enemy fire and lost Mason Reed in a current he could still hear in his sleep. Every official report had called it a storm-compromised collapse. Cale called it the moment his hands stopped arriving in time. Since then, he had measured every decision against that night, and every bad one still somehow sounded like water. Maybe that was why he kept moving instead of quitting. Maybe it was why he trusted the dog more than the people. Rook had been with him through the last 8 months of his service, 3 successful hostage recoveries, and one mission Cale no longer allowed himself to name. The shepherd was never dramatic. He did not bark at ghosts, and he did not freeze for no reason. So when they left the road and cut past the last row of condemned homes toward the old cottonwood at the edge of town, Cale noticed the exact moment Rook's gait changed. The dog stopped scanning the houses and started reading the ground. His ears sharpened forward. His pace slowed by inches. Then, under the dead branches beside a drifted line of cracked flagstone, he froze so completely it looked unnatural, one front paw lifted, breath smoking in the dark, body turned into a statue aimed at a single patch of snow. Cale stopped too. He had seen this posture before in minefields, in ruined basements, outside bombed schools where walls hid the living and the dead. Rook was not warning about danger in general. He was locking onto something exact. "Heel," Cale said quietly. The dog did not move. "Rook!" "Nothing." Cale stepped closer, boots crunching through crusted snow, and knelt beside the spot. At first he saw nothing except flattened drift and a few dark stains from old leaves. Then he took off one glove and pressed his palm to the ground. The skin of his hand burned immediately, not from cold, but from the wrongness of what he felt. The snow was warm. Not by much. Not enough for anyone untrained to notice. But enough to tell him there was moving air under that patch of earth. Rook gave a low, ugly growl in his throat. Cale brushed snow aside. Under the top crust, a line emerged, too straight, too clean, a metal edge half buried beneath packed ice and dirt. His pulse changed. He dug faster. A ring handle appeared. Then a second corner. Not a grave marker. Not a culvert cap. A hatch. Steel. Deliberately hidden. Before he could clear the whole thing, a lantern flared behind him. Then another. Cale stood in one smooth motion and turned with his hand already inside his coat. 3 lanterns glowed now at the edge of the cottonwood line, turning snow into yellow shadow and the people holding them into half-made figures. The old woman from the porches stood at the center, coat black, face cut narrow by years and weather, eyes steady in a way that made Cale dislike her instantly. 2 men stood behind her, one with a hat brim low, one holding his lantern too high because he was nervous. Farther back, more shapes lingered between the houses. They had followed him. Or they had been waiting to see if the dog would stop here. You were told not to linger, the woman said. I was told not to dig, Cale answered. That made me curious. Her gaze shifted to the snow at his boots, then to Rook, who had moved half a step in front of him and set himself square over the hidden seam. The dog should have kept walking, she said. He knows better, Cale replied. There are places in this town the weather protects for a reason, she said. Open that, and you won't be dealing with weather anymore. Cale crouched again anyway. Rook lowered his head and pressed one paw directly over the hidden ring. Then it came, 3 tiny knocks from below, so soft they would have vanished under the wind if the dog had not chosen that exact place to stop. Cale felt the sound through the metal more than he heard it. He went still. The old woman's lantern hand twitched. Back away, she said. Now. Cale ignored her. He cleared more snow. The knocks came again. Then a child's voice, faint, crushed by steel and earth and terror. Please, it whispered. Don't let them hear me. Everything in him went cold in a new way. Not weather cold. Mission cold. The kind that strips feeling down to sequence, threat, route, objective, time. He looked up slowly at the people with lanterns. One of the men behind the old woman could no longer hide his fear. The younger one, the same deputy's helper from the 4th porch, looked like he was already regretting every silence he had kept. Who's under there? Cale asked. Nobody answered. Then, from far beneath the town or somewhere hidden inside it, a bell sounded. Not church clear. Dull. Mechanical. Buried. One heavy strike. The young man flinched at the sound. The old woman closed her eyes for half a beat like someone counting down to something she did not want hurried. Rook's head turned sharply toward the road, then back to the hatch, then toward Cale, and he slammed his shoulder once against Cale's knee. Hurry. The youth made his choice then. He reached into his coat with shaking fingers while the old woman hissed his name under her breath, pulled out a brass key, and threw it into the snow at Cale's boots. If you open it now, he said, voice breaking, you need to move fast. Cale snatched up the key. Why? The boy looked toward the dark road beyond town. Because when the second bell rings, he said, the riders come for what's left. As if the night had been waiting for him to speak the rule aloud, headlights ignited through the storm at the north end of town, long white blades cutting across the drifts as trucks began to descend the grade. Rook bared his teeth at once. Cale drove the key into the lock. The mechanism was stiff, old, layered, one turn, then another, then a deeper internal catch. When the final latch released, warm damp air burst up through the seam carrying bleach, rust, wet concrete, and the unmistakable smell of fear stored too long in a closed space. Cale got both hands under the ring handle and hauled. The hatch opened 3 inches. Small fingers shot into the gap from below, blue with cold, filthy at the nails. A little face appeared under the edge, dark hair, swollen lip, eyes too old for the rest of her. And behind her, in the industrial gloom below, he saw more children moving in the narrow light of a hidden chamber wall marked with stenciled letters, holding B3. The second bell rang. Too soon. Second bell rang too soon for anybody still pretending this was only fear and weather. Its buried metallic thud rolled under the town and straight through Cale's ribs, and the people with lanterns reacted before the sound had even finished crossing the square. The woman did not move at all, and that stillness told Cale more than panic could have. She had expected the bell. Rook had too. The shepherd snapped from the hatch to the road with a vicious spark, and a second later the trucks appeared through the wideout, dark county-style utility rigs, low and long, chains biting ice, headlights wide enough to turn the whole block into a cold stage. Cale shouldered the hatch higher and looked down into the chamber below. The little girl with the swollen lip was already climbing toward him as 2 smaller children pressed close behind her. He saw cinderblock walls, a floor drain, frost on a pipe seam, and beyond the latter a chained inner door with a narrow wired glass slit, as if the room beneath the town had not been built to shelter children at all, but to store them. Name, he said, dropping one arm into the opening. May, the girl whispered, grabbing his wrist. Please hurry. He hauled her up one-handed and set her behind him just as the trucks braked hard at the edge of the square. Their doors opened in sequence. 4 men got out of the lead truck, then 3 from the second, all in dark winter gear with badges turned inward or taped over. The one in front carried a flat case instead of a rifle. Rook planted himself broadside between the road and the hatch, snow frosting his back, head low, teeth showing now. The woman finally spoke again. "If you keep opening that," she said, "you stop being a visitor and start being part of it." Cale ignored her. "Take her," he told the young deputy's helper, shoving May toward him. The boy hesitated only a fraction before catching her around the shoulders. She flinched from his hands until Rook touched her knuckles once with his nose. Then she steadied. The children already trusted the dog more than anyone in town. Cale dragged the next child upward, a small boy with a bent spoon gripped in one fist like he turned cafeteria metal into his own little knife against the world. The transfer team spread wider. The man with the flat case stopped when he saw the open hatch and said, not loudly but with total authority, "Seal that." The men beside him peeled out instantly. "County wants to make sure no one's stranded in the storm," the woman said, as though she was still trying to preserve the lie. "County can explain the kids under the street later," Cale said. The local boy looked like he wanted to disappear into the snow. "They're not county," he said under his breath. "Not really." Another fracture in the cover. Cale pulled the third child free, a little girl with frostbitten fingers and one boot gone, and shoved her toward the half-buried stone war memorial in the square. "Run there and stay low." She stared at him. Rook took 3 fast backward steps toward the monument without taking his eyes off the men approaching the hatch. The girl ran because the dog moved. Above the heads of the advancing men, Cale saw the lead truck's grille more clearly, and recognized the county emergency emblem painted beneath fresh grime. Official enough to make excuses later. Dirty enough to vanish by dawn. He dropped his flashlight back into the opening. "Who's left?" he shouted. "Lena!" May screamed from behind the war memorial. Cale swept the beam and found not another child by the ladder, but a pale little face behind the wired slit in the chained inner door. "I'm here!" the girl cried, fingers hooked through the mesh. Not in the holding room. Behind it. Deeper. The man with the flat case heard her too, and for the first time his composure cracked. "No," he said too quickly. That was all Cale needed. He dropped into the hatch without another thought, hit the ladder hard, and landed in the chamber below with Rook right behind him in a white blur. The concrete room was colder than the snow above but carried an artificial edge, bleach, rust, stale heat, wet wool, and the scent of frightened children packed into a place designed to look temporary while remaining permanent. May's friends huddled back against the wall as Cale crossed to the inner door. Lena stood behind the glass, cheeks hollow, one eye ringed yellow with an old bruise, a red bracelet wound twice around her wrist. She backed up only when Rook pressed his nose against the wire and gave a soft sound no human could have made correctly. Cale hit the chain bracket with the shotgun stock once, twice, 3 times, until one anchor tore from the wall and the whole lock swung loose with a scream of metal. The door opened. Lena stumbled out and hit him around the waist so hard he almost lost his balance. "May?" she asked against his coat. "Up top," he said. "Still alive if we keep moving." The chamber lights flickered once. Then a hidden strip of red emergency lamps flared to life beneath the floor seam of the corridor beyond, revealing a deeper municipal annex running under the town like a buried second spine. On the wall, under peeling paint, his beam caught the words Municipal Storm Annex B and, below them in newer stencil, Rider holds/night transfer. The children saw his face change and looked at him as if it mattered more than the letters. Rook moved first. He went down the corridor 10 feet, stopped under the red light, and turned his head toward a low vent on the right wall. Hackles rose. Cale heard nothing at first. Then, from inside the duct, a whisper. "Don't go to intake." Female. Young. Alive. Lena flinched. "That's Nora," she whispered. "She crawled there when the bell started." Cale stepped closer to the vent. One eye flashed in the dusk-dark bend, then vanished. "Can you come out?" he asked. "No," the voice whispered back. "They're waiting at the far end." Trap geometry. He turned left instead and tried the first numbered door. B4. Unlocked. Inside was not another cell but an office, metal desk, filing drawers, county maps under clear plastic, a charging radio unit, ring binders labeled winter welfare checks and municipal transfer route. The first intake card he picked up hit hard enough. Unsheltered/no claim. Route number. Weather condition. Porch notation. But the second card made the room narrow around him in a way no concrete ever could. Recommended handler, Reed Mason. Same clipped block letters. Same dead name. The radio crackled on cue. "Lower team confirm B3 compromised," a male voice said through the hiss. "Reed, if you're on South Watch, collapse intake 1 and push remaining inventory to Chapel side." Cale went still. Not memory. Not grief. Present tense. Rook slammed his shoulder once against Cale's knee, grounding him before shock could turn into delay. Boots hammered somewhere deeper in the annex. He shut off the radio, pocketed the card, and forced his voice back under control. "Lena, have you seen Mason Reed?" She nodded immediately, terrified and certain. "The river man," she whispered. "He smells like wet rope, and he never looks at us when the bells ring." Before Cale could ask more, a shadow stopped at the far end of the corridor beneath the strip light. Broad shoulders. Head lowered. A body held at that exact quarter-angle soldiers use when they are measuring threat. It didn't rush. It didn't even draw. It just stood there while Rook held the line, the children huddled behind Cale, Nora shook in the vent, and the annex waited to see whether ghosts would speak. Then the man at the end of the corridor lifted his face into the red light, and Cale saw Mason Reed alive, older, gaunter, and impossible, with the same eyes that had looked up at him over black water the last time. Mason's mouth moved first. "If the dog froze on that spot," he said, voice flat with years and failure, "then he already knows what's buried under this town." Cale did not lower the gun when Mason stepped fully into the red strip light, because the dead had no right to walk back into a man's life looking tired and real. For one warped second every sound in the annex became sharper than thought. The hum in the concrete walls, Lena's breathing behind him, Nora shifting in the vent, the low murderous growl in Rook's chest, and all of it seemed to circle the one impossible fact standing at the far end of the corridor. Mason Reed looked older, leaner, cut down by hunger and years, but not broken in the way a corpse should be broken. He stood with his shoulders turned slightly, weight balanced, hands visible, as if he knew exactly how hard Cale would be fighting not to shoot him. "You shouldn't have come below intake," Mason said. "Once the second bell hits, the system stops hiding and starts moving." Cale's mouth went dry. "Funny," he said. "I remember burying you in my head." Mason's face twitched, not quite with pain, not quite with sarcasm. "That was easier for everyone." Rook barked once, sharp and violent, and the sound cracked the frozen shock just enough for Cale to think like a soldier again. There were still children here. Still doors. Still booths somewhere deeper in the annex. Dead teammates could wait 3 more seconds. "What is this place?" he asked. Mason's eyes flicked to the office Cale had just searched, then to the corridor lights. "A storm annex that stopped being about storms a long time ago. And the spot in the square?" Mason looked toward the ceiling, toward the weight of the town above them. "That's not a hatch people were meant to find. It's a heat vent. The stack under the old room. It breathes through the center line when they've got bodies below." Lena made a small sound, and Cale felt her move tighter behind him. "How many?" he asked. Mason didn't answer fast enough, which told him as much as any number. "Tonight?" Lena whispered. Mason finally looked at her, and something in his face changed. Not softness. Recognition. "Too many," he said. "And if they realize you've opened B3, they'll start splitting them." Another whisper came from the vent. "They're opening intake." Nora's voice was thin with panic. I can hear the cold line. Mason snapped his head toward the sealed door down the annex as if he already knew exactly what she meant. Then move. Cale did not budge. Why should I trust one word you say? Mason's expression went flat. You shouldn't. But the kid in intake doesn't have time for your anger. That hit because it was true, and Cale hated him for being right. He took the access ring from the operative at Rook's feet, kept the revolver trained low, and went to the door marked Intake 1. The lock fought him on the first 2 keys. Mason crossed without asking permission and tore open a rusted panel beside the frame, yanking 2 wires apart with a violence too practiced to be improvised. The light above the door changed from red to amber. Cale noticed it even while opening the door. Mason knew this route too well. Knew it like a man who had lived here, worked here, survived here, or all 3. The cold inside the room hit like a knife. A small boy lay curled on a cot under 2 thin blankets, frost feathering down from the vent directly above him. He wasn't sleeping. He was shutting down. Blue lips. Slow blink. Tiny fingers tucked under his own arms trying to hold in the last of his body heat. Cale crossed the room in one stride and got him up immediately. The boy weighed almost nothing. That frightened him more than the room. Name? Cale asked, though the answer hardly mattered. Lena spoke from the doorway. Eli. Mason was already wrenching another valve wheel on the far wall, forcing the vent line to stutter and cough. No warm rooms left, he said. Only less bad ones. Cale nearly turned on him then. How do you know that? Mason didn't even look back. Because I've had to choose them before. No explanation. No defense. Just another wound dropped in the middle of the floor. Rook came off the pinned operative, and shoved his nose hard against Cale's thigh, then Eli's shoulder, then the open doorway. Move now. Another line had opened. Another room had changed. The annex was already shifting around them. Cale picked up the boy, motioned Lena close, and followed Mason deeper while Nora scraped through the vent overhead trying to keep pace with their movement. The corridor bent twice. Once past a boiler room with dead gauges. Once past a wall map of the town with old emergency markings scratched over by newer coded routes. At the third door Mason stopped and keyed in a sequence without looking. It opened onto a room that turned Cale's blood colder than the holding chamber ever had. Records was not files and dust. It was a false life built underground. Old library stacks divided bunk spaces. School newsletters and town fair clippings lined one wall. Missing person notices shared space with community photographs, church bulletins, and obituary cuttings. The same children appeared in more than one story. Here a girl was listed dead in a winter slide. There she smiled at a harvest fair beside a name that did not belong to her. Here a boy was reported sent to relatives in Idaho. There his intake card hung on a nail beneath a porch number. The room had been used to manufacture ordinary lives out of stolen children. They teach us our outside names in here, Lena said quietly. Cale looked at her, then at the clippings again, and understood the true sickness of the town. The porches weren't only refusing strangers. They were feeding a machine that could rewrite who belonged where, who had vanished, who had moved away, who had died, who had never existed in the first place. Rook moved through the room in a clean search pattern, checking cot corners, heating pipes, under the archive stacks, then stopped at a cast-iron dumbwaiter shaft near the far wall and froze again. Cale was starting to understand that the dog never simply found danger. He found the hinge where the lie turned. Mason went to the shaft, tugged an almost invisible release beneath the frame, and the iron door dropped open. Inside were canvas mail sacks, a county archive box, and intake cards bundled in elastic. Cale opened the top packet and saw the same typed categories from before, only these went back years. Unsheltered. No claim. Winter transfer. Porch assignment pending. Then one note in different ink caught his eye like a live wire, subject redirected after canine interference. Watch for Turner if he returns north. Cale lifted his head slowly. They knew me. Mason's voice came from behind him. No. They knew your file. Cale turned. Stop talking like that means anything. It means this town didn't start watching when you broke down on the road. It means somebody remembered your family line long before you came home. Before Cale could push harder, the portable radio clipped to Mason's side burst into static. Then the same calm male voice from earlier came through, clipped and irritated now. South Team report. Upper hold is compromised. If Turner is below, lock him in with the old room. Mason went still. Truly still. That scared Cale more than the radio. Rook's head snapped toward the floor beneath the photograph's wall. The dog moved across the room and planted himself over one section of old rug, staring down as if he could see through wood, concrete, and history. What old room? Cale demanded. Mason met his eyes. The real one. He crossed to a metal shelf, ripped out a rusted binder spine, and drove it into a hidden latch beside the wall. The shelf shuddered. Dust fell. The rug buckled, and a cast iron plate unlocked beneath it with a deep internal clunk. Warm, damp air breathed up through the seam. Not room heat. Human heat. Stored heat. The same raw warmth Rook had found under the square. Lena gasped. Eli whimpered weakly in Cale's arms. Nora, from somewhere inside the vent, whispered, No! The old room sat directly under the town, under the porches, under the lies, breathing upward through the one spot Rook had chosen from the very start. Cale went to the ring handle and hauled. The plate lifted enough to reveal iron rungs descending into orange light. And that was when the room above them stopped pretending it would wait. Something punched down the dumbwaiter shaft and hit the floor at their feet. A canister. White gas began pouring out instantly, low and fast, turning the red light into a poison haze. Lena screamed. Eli convulsed once in Cale's arms. Boots hammered in the annex outside. A hard metal strike slammed into the B4 office frame. Then another. Breech tools. Mason moved first, grabbing the archive box and shoving it toward the opening. Down! He barked. Rook dropped to the first rung without hesitation and looked back up, eyes locked on the children, on Cale, on the dark that had to be chosen again. Cale shoved Lena toward the opening. She froze one instant, then climbed because the dog was waiting below. The gas thickened. The first breech charge detonated in the hall, blowing the outer door inward in a spray of splinters and light. Cale dropped Eli down to Mason and turned just in time to see masked operatives pour through the haze with carbines up. Paper erupted into the air around the clippings wall like snow made from lies. Cale fired once. Somebody fell. Mason overturned the metal desk into the doorway. Rook barked from below, sharp, urgent, commanding. The hatch started to descend on its own. Hidden failsafe. The old room meant to seal itself once purge began. Cale grabbed the edge with one hand and shoved Eli through with the other. Mason jammed the archive box into the counterarm long enough to stall the mechanism. Gas, gunfire, falling paper, children below, a dead friend alive and shouting him away. Cale felt the whole shape of the old failure rushing back. Don't do this again, he snapped at Mason. Mason actually smiled then, broken and furious and heartbreakingly familiar. Then stop climbing toward me when the kids are under you. The box slipped. The counterarm sheared. The hatch slammed downward. Rook cleared it by inches, twisting into the shaft below. Cale dropped after him with Lena and Eli, landing hard in heat and darkness as the cast iron plate crashed shut above them like a tomb lid. He hit the underside once with both fists anyway. Gunfire thundered above. Then silence. Below, the old room waited. When Cale turned his light across it, the beam found porch plaques, house numbers, brass mail slots, and lockers circling a central black iron vent stack like a town had been copied underground and stripped for parts. On the nearest locker, under a frost-rimmed tag, one name had already been opened for tonight. Turner Mara. Cale stopped breathing. For one suspended second Cale could not tell whether the name on the locker was meant to warn him, break him, or drag him into the same lie that had swallowed the rest of the town. Turner Mara. The tag swung slightly in the warm draft coming off the central vent stack, tapping once against the iron latch like a fingernail against the coffin lid. Lena saw the change in his face and stopped moving. Nora, still coughing from the gas she had crawled through, looked from the name to Cale and then away again like she already understood that some truths came with blast radius. Eli shivered on the blanket pile at their feet, too cold and too small to know why the room had suddenly become quieter than fear. Rook did not care about the name. He cared about the scent. The white shepherd crossed to the locker at once, pressed his nose to the seam, then froze in that razor-thin way Cale had come to trust more than radios, officials, or his own hope. Not danger exactly. Presence. Recent human use. Warmth where there should have been dust. Cale crouched, touched the latch, and felt it immediately. The metal was not old cold like the others. It had been handled recently. He should have checked the room first. He knew that. He should have swept corners, vent lines, secondary doors, blind angles. But grief and mystery share one terrible quality. Both can make a trained man violate his own discipline if the wound underneath is old enough. He drove the crowbar into the latch once, twice, then on the third hit the old iron split with a scream of metal that tore through the circular room and came back to them in warped echoes. The locker door jerked open. Cale's light went inside first. No body. Not even bones. Instead he found a folded winter coat sealed in plastic, one county envelope water-stained at the edges, and an oilcloth-wrapped cassette recorder placed so carefully on the shelf it looked less like storage and more like preservation. That frightened him more than remains would have. Bones meant the past had ended. A recorder meant the past had waited. He took the envelope first because paper hurts faster. Inside was a thin stack of old forms, one carbon copy of an incident report, and a tight page with the county seal stamped over the corner hard enough to tear it. The title line read, Non-Transfer Loss/Turner, Mara/Winter Structure Fire. The words blurred once before his eyes refocused by force. He kept reading. Place of death. Ridge Road outbuilding. Weather delay. Body unrecoverable without structural compromise. Closed identification by documentation. Family notification complete. Then, handwritten in blue pencil across the margin, almost hidden beneath the seal, one note, porch discrepancy unresolved. Original voice held below. Cale read that line twice and understood less of it the second time than the first. Mara? Lena whispered, so softly the name felt stolen. That was your person. Cale swallowed and answered without looking at her. My sister. That changed something in the room. Not the structure. The children. Lena's fears shifted shape. Nora stopped coughing for a second. Even Eli, wrapped in blanket and half gone from cold, looked up with the distant alertness sick children keep for adult pain that suddenly sounds familiar. The hidden town beneath them was full of stolen names, borrowed stories, fake relatives, false deaths, and assigned porches. Yet this one, somehow, belonged to Cale before it belonged to the system. That made it dangerous in a different way. Rook barked once at the recorder. Good dog. Focus. Cale set the papers in his jacket and unwrapped the oilcloth. The recorder was old, rectangular, and municipal issued once upon a time, the kind of cheap tape machine county clerks used for statements before everybody claimed digital had fixed human dishonesty. A white label had been fixed to the side with yellowing tape. One word. Mara. A date from 12 winters ago. The same week they had buried an empty lie under his family name, and called it closure. Can you play it? Nora asked from the bench, voice still rough from the vent. Cale looked at the buttons. The answer was yes. The better question was whether he should. The old room around them was not a normal chamber. He could feel that now. It had the wrong warmth, the wrong acoustics, the wrong patience. Around the circular walls, real fragments of the town's porches had been mounted over iron lockers and waiting benches, house numbers, cut sections of painted trim, brass knockers, latch plates polished by years of hands that no longer used them above ground. Beneath some lockers children had shoved gloves, bottle caps, prayer cards, and bits of ribbon into the cracks as proof they had once waited here. It was not only storage. It was ritual. A sorting place where the town above had been reduced to decisions below. Lena spoke before he could overthink the recorder. Don't play it loud. He looked at her. Why? Her eyes moved to the central vent stack caged in black iron at the middle of the room. Warm air breathed through it in slow pulses. Voices wake things, she said. That could have meant anything in this town, which made it useful and useless at once. Cale took one step toward the stack anyway, recorder in hand, then stopped when Rook wheeled away from him and planted himself toward the second corridor that ran beyond the old room's heat pipes. The shepherd's body went tight. Ears forward. Mouth closed. Listening. A second later they all heard it too. Footsteps. Not many. Not hurried. Measured. Coming from deeper under town, where the warm line vanished into more concrete and more hidden purpose. Cale slipped the recorder into his coat and brought the revolver up. The figure who entered the edge of the red utility glow did not rush. She came with a lantern in one hand and a ring of keys at her hip, moving with the steady confidence of someone who had walked this floor so often it had become part of her spine. It was the same old woman from the square, but down here she looked less like a citizen and more like an office. Black wool coat. Iron striker looped at the belt. County seal ring at one gloved hand. Her face seemed narrower underground, cut not only by weather but by the long habit of deciding who counted and who did not. The locker should have stayed shut, she said. Cale kept the revolver centered on her chest. You buried my sister under a fake report. The woman's lantern shifted slightly. No, she said. The county buried a structure fire. I kept what didn't fit. The answer was so monstrous in its calm that Cale almost fired just to make the room honest again. Behind her, two more shapes resolved in the side passage, armed men, not county clean anymore, just hidden system practical. One held a short restraint pole. The other a compact shotgun kept low for enclosed work. Lena retreated until her back hit a locker. Nora dragged Eli farther along the bench without being told. Rook moved between the children and the woman, hackles high, body angled not at her face but at her hands. Smart. Always smarter. Who are you? Cale asked. She looked around the room once, lantern glow brushing porch plaques and iron doors. The one who keeps the porches honest, she said. When the weather is bad enough, someone must decide who was refused, who was missed, and which stories can still survive mourning. A clerk of human disappearance. That was what she was. Not a witch. Not a myth. A function. Cale lifted the report page from his pocket with his left hand. What does porch discrepancy unresolved mean? For the first time, something like real emotion touched her face. Not guilt. Irritation. It means your sister knocked at the wrong door and lived long enough to leave a problem. The room changed again. Not dead in the fire. Lived long enough. Cale took a step toward her before he knew he had moved. Say that again. She came in winter, the woman replied, not backing up. Pregnant, injured, scared, and too stubborn to understand that towns like this do not save what storms drag in. She made noise. She named names. She left a voice print. That forced paperwork. Paperwork forced storage. Storage forced a discrepancy. You should be grateful I kept it from becoming a cleaner ending. Lena made a choke sound. Nora stared at Cale as if she had just seen the entire room turn and expose its real teeth. Pregnant. The word hit harder than the false fire report. Harder than Mason alive. Harder than the locker itself. Cale had buried his sister in his mind as a young woman already gone. The woman in this old room's memory had lived long enough to carry a child under the town that erased children. Rook exploded before Cale could. Not into attack, into intervention. The shepherd slammed shoulder first into the nearest bench, knocking it sideways into the line between the shotgun man and the children just as the armed figure shifted his stance. The room understood itself at once. The old woman's calm broke just enough for danger to show through. Take the recorder, she snapped. That was the tell. The tape mattered more than Cale. He moved instantly, not backward, but inward, driving toward the vent stack while the first operative tried to step around the overturned bench, and Rook hit him low with a savage, realistic burst of force that sent man and weapon into the lockers. Nora screamed. Eli cried out in weak confusion. Lena dropped to the floor and crawled for the fallen lantern before anyone could kick it. Cale ripped the recorder from his coat and thumbed the play switch. Static hissed once. Then a woman's voice filled the old room. Thin. Damaged by age and tape warble. But alive. "My name is Mara Turner," the recording said, and every person in the chamber went still. Even the dog. The old woman's face changed in a way Cale had not thought it capable of. Not fear of the past. Fear of what the room would do with it. She lunged toward him and shouted, "Stop the tape!" Too late. Mara's voice continued, stronger under the static now, as if the warm stack itself had recognized the sound. "If my brother ever hears this, don't let them move the porch names below 4th bell. They took my child through the warm place. They told the town she died with me. She did not." The words detonated in silence first. "My child." Cale felt the room tip. Lena stared at him. Nora covered her mouth. The old woman moved again, this time not for the recorder but for the central vent stack, striking the iron cage once with the brass bell striker at her hip. The old room answered immediately. Deep below the floor, something mechanical woke with a chain-heavy roar. Warm air surged upward hard enough to shake frost off the lockers and blow Eli's blanket edge back from the bench. The circular seam around the stack split open inch by inch beneath the black iron cage. The armed man under Rook got one desperate shot off. It shattered a lantern against the wall and sent firelight skidding across the porch plaques. Cale grabbed the recorder with one hand and the cage with the other as the platform began to rise. The old woman's voice came sharp and furious now, stripped of ritual at last. "You stupid man," she hissed. "You've opened transfer." The iron lift climbed through steam and red light. And inside the narrow cage, strapped upright under a wool blanket with an oxygen line at her face, stood a little girl with dark hair, winter-pale skin, and Mara Turner's eyes. Cale trusted the dog. He had trusted him in dry riverbeds wired to kill, in ruined schools that still held breathing children behind false walls, and on nights when the difference between instinct and miracle felt too small to name. So when Rook froze in the side passage with his whole body aligned toward the ridge route, and Wren whispered that he knew where they were taking the Bell child, Cale made the kind of choice that always hurt before it helped. He stripped the recorder from his coat, shoved it into Lena's hands, jammed a fistful of brass porch plates into Nora's blanket wrap around Eli, and crouched just long enough to put his face level with Wren's. "You stay with them," he said. "You go up the stack ladder, you find May. And you do not follow any voice that says county." Wren clutched the front of his jacket so hard her knuckles whitened. "They take the little ones if the bells change," she whispered. "She'll think nobody came." Rook solved the hesitation by moving. He crossed back from the corridor, touched Wren once with his muzzle, then planted himself against Cale's thigh for one beat before turning again toward the dark. "Go." The porch keeper, still pinned in the steam and red light of the old room, laughed through blood and breath. "You can chase the road or keep your dead sister's child," she said. "That's what winter does. It makes every rescue smaller than the loss." Cale crossed to her in 2 steps, took the ring of keys from her belt, and bent close enough that she finally had to look up at him instead of through him. "No," he said quietly. "That's what people like you do." Then he ripped the brass bell striker from her hip and hurled it into the vent stack. The clang that followed rolled through the circular room like a false bell strike and sent the whole hidden mechanism into another fit of chain noise and steam, enough distraction that Lena, Nora, Eli, and Wren could get moving toward the rear ladder. He didn't watch them climb. He couldn't. He trusted Rook to hear them if they stopped breathing right. He took the revolver, 1 extra magazine from the fallen operative, and 3 of the most recent brass plates, then ran with Ghost down the warm line corridor beneath the town while the 3rd bell tolled above them in broken bronze through stone, snow, and the patched relay line Mara was still fighting to keep alive. The passage dropped and narrowed fast, old concrete sweating around ancient heat pipes, the floor slick with runoff and black grit. This had never been a simple escape route. It was a transport artery, meant for quiet movement under bad weather, the kind of buried line that lets a town keep its hands clean while its foundations do something filthy. Cale's light caught painted arrows at the bends, ridge, culvert, chapel, return, then older ones beneath them scraped half away by time. Somewhere ahead an engine idled. Somewhere closer a child cried once, and was hushed so quickly the sound felt cut with a knife. Rook's ears went forward. Cale killed his light and moved the rest of the way by red service lamps and memory of the dog's shoulders. They reached the last bend in time to see the service mouth under the ridge road before anyone below saw them, a low reinforced opening disguised behind a snowbank and broken culvert stone, one dark county truck back near flush to the exit, another angled across the road as cover, two masked men at the rear doors, and a transit chair strapped upright beside the tailgate with a hooded child lashed into it under gray blankets. Flood lamps threw everything into hard white glare. Steam rose from exhaust. Ledger boxes sat stacked in the truck bed under canvas. Cale took one step forward and saw the detail that made his pulse drop into mission cold again. Not just county trucks, but county emergency logos half scraped off and replaced with temporary magnetic panels. Rook did not wait for permission. He launched from the dark like white shrapnel and hit the nearest masked man at the knees before the operative could even bring the restraint pole around. The man crashed into the snowbank with a cry. Cale used the shock beat exactly the way training had burned it into him, crossing low and fast, firing once into the flood lamp instead of flesh so the scene broke into blinding shadow bands. The second operative swore and turned, shotgun rising too slow. Cale slammed him shoulder first into the truck door, ripped the weapon free, and drove the stock into the man's temple. He went down hard. The hooded child in the transit chair screamed. The driver's side door of the lead truck opened at once. Another figure stepped out, broad-shouldered, winter coat zipped high, moving with awful professional calm. Cale fired from instinct. The shot clipped metal and sparked off the truck frame because the figure had already pivoted half off-line in the exact way only trained men do. Not county training. Military. The stranger's face turned in the floodlight, and Cale felt the world split under him a second time that night. Mason Reed. Leaner, older, gaunter, but real as freezing breath and recoil smoke. He did not aim at Cale. He aimed at the transit chair restraints and shouted, "Down your head!" to the child inside. Then he fired twice, cutting one strap and blowing the lock off the transport clamp. The chair pitched sideways. Cale stared for the fraction of a second it took disbelief to become movement. Mason used that second too. He slammed a metal ledger case into the transfer leader coming around the back of the truck, knocking the man's pistol into the slush, then looked straight at Cale with the expression of someone who had been waiting years for one chance to be understood and knew he had not earned it. "Take the kid!" he shouted. "They split the list!" Another operative emerged from under the truck with a sidearm. Rook hit him mid-rise and both vanished into drift and floodlight glare. Cale lunged for the transit chair, tore the hood back, and found a little girl younger than Wren, maybe 7, one-eye bruised, lips blue, a porch token tied at her throat with red string. Sedation had slowed her but not erased the terror in her face. He cut the final strap. She fell into him with all the dead weight of a child who had learned not to help when adults touched her. Mason shouted something else, too late. The transfer leader recovered his footing and drove a knife low into Mason's side hard enough to fold him into the truck bed. Cale felt the old river bridge rise inside his chest at once, the exact wrong second, the exact same impossible split, save the child in his arms or go for the man he had already lost once. Failure chose for him before he could. The road under the rear truck shuddered. A shaped charge planted somewhere in the culvert wall blew with a concussive crack that tore snow, ice, and broken concrete across the service mouth. The truck lurched. One ledger box flew open in the blast and route papers whipped into the storm. Rook came out of the drift bloodied at the shoulder, snarling, but the transfer leader was already dragging himself into the cab while another operative hauled Mason backward by the collar with one hand and the surviving ledger case with the other. Cale fired, but the shot went wide through slush and engine steam as the lead truck jackknifed forward, tires spinning, then caught and roared uphill into the white. The second truck followed hard behind it. Cale stood in the blast snow with the rescued girl in his arms, Rook limping beside him, and watched the taillights vanish into the storm carrying Mason, half the road ledger, and whatever truth had still not finished revealing itself. He had saved one child. He had lost the chase. And in the settling powder at his boots, half buried by the charged blast, one torn ledger page remained pinned under a shard of ice. At the top, in county type, it read Bell Child Transfer /Tier 1 Lineage /Turner File Continuation. Cale stood in the blast snow with the rescued girl locked against his chest, Rook bleeding at the shoulder beside him, and the taillights of the escaping county truck burning red through the storm until the white swallowed them whole, and in that one swallowed moment he understood exactly how the town had survived for so long. Every truth it could not kill cleanly, it split, moved, renamed, and buried in separate directions until no one person could hold the full shape of it at once. The little girl in his arms was barely conscious, breath thin, porch token cold against his wrist where it hung from the red twine around her neck. He forced himself to look at it properly while the culvert still shook from the charged blast. On one side was a porch number. On the other, under the ice and grime, a handwritten route note, continuation /Tier 1. Not a name. Not a child. A continuation. A fragment of something the system still believed belonged somewhere else. Rook, he said, and the dog answered instantly despite the blood matting his white fur, wheeling away from the disappearing trucks and planting himself at the culvert tunnel mouth that led back under the ridge rather than up toward the road. Good. Not the chase. The truth first. Cale gathered the child tighter and went back through the warm line corridor at a run, boots hitting shallow runoff, the tunnel air full of heat, old concrete, and the ghostly vibration of St. Jude's bells still carrying through patched relay lines from somewhere above town. Halfway back the handheld crackled. Mara. Her voice came ragged through wind and panic. Cole. Then corrected itself because even in disaster some old names take longer to die. Cale, answer me. He keyed back without slowing. Alive. Coming back with another child. Mara swore once under her breath in sheer exhausted relief, then kept going. Town's cracking open. People are running from River Road to the farm. Some porches finally opened, some didn't, and now the ones that didn't are lying faster than they can think. Wade's broadcast hit every channel. We've got half the valley hearing him and the other half pretending they didn't. What do I do? Cale ducked a low pipe, Rook already ahead in the turn. Keep them moving under row 7. No one waits topside. If anyone in a county truck tells them to stop, you tell them I said the trucks are part of it. Already done. She snapped. And Cale? What? Her voice lowered in a way that cut straight through the storm hiss. Your farm's not just holding people anymore. They're looking at it like it was built for this. He almost laughed, but there was nothing in him left that wasn't too tired or too angry to make the sound. My father knew. Then you'd better come back breathing and tell them why. The line went dead. Rook hit the old room entrance first and barked once before Cale even crossed the threshold, warning the children before they saw the blood on him or the new girl in his arms. Lena came up from the ladder first, recorder clutched in both hands, face streaked with tears and soot. Nora was beside Wren near the vent stack, Eli wrapped tighter in blankets. All of them stopped mid-breath the instant Cale stepped into the steam-heavy red light with the rescued Bell child. Wren saw the girl first. The reaction was immediate and wrong in the exact way real truths usually are. She did not simply stare. She went white, then took 2 trembling steps forward like she was walking toward a reflection that had somehow learned to bleed separately. Mira? She whispered. The little girl in Cale's arms blinked awake just enough to hear that name, and all the sedation, fear, cold, and transport shock seemed to crack around one instinct older than any room or system. She lifted her head, saw Wren, and began crying before she could even form the words. Ren. Nora covered her mouth. Lena looked from one face to the other in dawning horror. Same eyes. Same dark hair. Same terrified, stubborn shape at the mouth. Not cousins. Not random children from the same hidden line. Sisters. Twins, almost certainly, or near enough in age and blood that the room itself seemed to admit what it had been hiding the second they looked at each other. Ren crossed the floor on shaking legs and touched the red porch token at Myra's throat as if she had seen it before in dreams. Cale felt the old room tilt around him. The system had not just hidden Mara's child. It had split her children. One kept under the town, one kept moving through it. One witness stored. One continuation routed. Fragment the bloodline, fragment the truth. The porch keeper, still alive where Lena and Nora had bound her with wire and straps from the transit cage, started laughing again, not with triumph now, but with the brittle inevitability of someone who had finally lost control of a secret and wanted everyone else to suffer the full shape of it at once. You really didn't know, she said, blood drying dark at the corner of her mouth. She begged at 3 porches that night. 3. By the time they brought her below, your sister had already delivered one and was close to losing the other. The county doctor said keeping them together would create memory. 2 children become a pattern. A pattern becomes a witness. So one went into the warm file and one into continuation. Cale turned toward her so hard even Rook shifted. Warm file? She looked at Ren. The hidden one. The child too dangerous to put into paper. Then her eyes moved to the girl in his arms. And the moving one. The one raised through porch tokens, route stories, and transfer events until the right county hand could place her wherever the line needed to continue. Lena stared as if the whole underground town had just opened its jaw. You split babies, she whispered. The porch keeper answered with the same terrible calm the town above had spent years mistaking for order. We preserved the story. Cale wanted to kill her in that instant with a purity that frightened even him, and Rook felt it, stepping hard against his leg before he could move. The dog didn't look at Cale's face. He looked at the children. Always the children. Always the living first. Cale forced the anger down by turning it into a question sharp enough to cut. Mason knew. It was not really a question. The porch keeper's eyes flicked once toward the side corridor where the road team had fled. Mason knew enough to stay useful. Not enough to stay whole. That answer landed ugly because it fit too well. The riverman. The handler on the intake card. The dead teammate kept alive inside a system that used his guilt, his disappearance, his silence, and maybe his need to stay near the children against him. But even that was no longer the biggest truth in the room. Ren and Mira were clutching each other now in the middle of the steam and red utility light like separate halves of a life the county had cut apart and hidden in different files. Eli cried just because everyone else was shaking. Nora knelt beside him and started crying too. Lena set the recorder down with careful hands, as if tape and testimony had suddenly become heavier than any weapon. Cale crouched in front of the porch keeper. Why my sister? He asked. Why the Turner line? The old woman's face changed then, not into guilt, but into the grim annoyance of a clerk forced to explain what should have remained obvious to insiders. Because your mother died in the first winter failure and your father refused the settlement maps. Because Mara found the old route books. Because your family kept choosing the wrong kind of loyalty every time this town tried to tidy itself. By the time your sister came back pregnant and desperate, the line had already become a problem. Your father could be ridiculed. Mara had to be absorbed. The children had to be divided. And you. She looked at him in a way that finally made him understand just how far ahead of him the system had once been. You were supposed to stay gone. The room went still around that. Not because it was surprising now, but because it put shape to every other cruelty. Cale had not simply wandered back into a bad town by accident. He had been part of the unfinished file the whole time. Subject redirected after canine interference. Watch for Turner if he returns north. The county had been tracking his bloodline, his absence, his return. And Rook, impossible, stubborn, bright-eyed Rook, had blown the whole arrangement apart by freezing over the one warm place that still breathed beneath the square. Another relay thudded somewhere deeper in the hidden system. Then another. Nora looked up, suddenly terrified in a new direction. "That's not the road team," she whispered. "That's archives." The porch keeper heard it too and went pale for the first time since Cale met her. "Good. What archives?" he demanded. She didn't answer fast enough, so Lena did, because children trapped in systems learn to hear the meanings adults try to hide in machinery. "If warm file and continuation come together," she said, staring at Ren and Mira. The sealed box opens. Major reveal. There it was. The twins were not only a tragedy. They were a key. Not metaphorically. Mechanically. Bureaucratically. The hidden town beneath Bitter Run had been built around files, porches, continuations, and lineage, and somewhere below the old room, with both sisters now physically present in the same chamber for the first time since birth, another lock was starting to wake. Rook's head snapped toward the floor under the vent stack, body going rigid all over again. Steam shifted. The black iron cage trembled once. Then a heavy compartment somewhere beneath them unlocked with a deep metallic boom that sounded less like a drawer and more like a vault surrendering. Ren looked up at Cale with Mara's eyes, Mira clutching her sleeve, and asked the question in the smallest voice the room had ever heard. "What else did they keep?" Then, under the vent stack, a circular section of floor began to rise. The circular section of floor rose through the steam with a slow hydraulic shudder, not like a hatch and not like a lift, but like something the town had buried so long it had forgotten how to come up clean. Ren and Mira shrank together at once, fingers locked, while Lena dragged Eli behind the bench and Nora snatched up the recorder on reflex, as if Mara's voice might still be the only honest weapon left in the room. Rook did not retreat. The white German shepherd moved directly in front of the rising section and stood there with every muscle locked, head low, eyes fixed on the seam. Cale stepped in beside him, revolver in one hand, crowbar in the other, and watched the platform climb through red utility light until it revealed not a transit chair this time, but a cylindrical archive canister nested inside a steel collar, waist high and ringed with mechanical locks. Frost smoked off its surface even in the warmth of the old room. A county seal had been welded over the front once, and then crudely gouged through. Under it, stamped into the metal with older, cleaner lettering, were the words to one lineage/porch root. The porch keeper made a sound like prayer turning rotten. "Don't open that," she said. Cale didn't look at her. "You think I came this far to stop at the last lie?" Another relay kicked somewhere below the floor. Then another. The canister's side ports hissed. Above them, through stone and vent line and snow, the fourth bell began to gather again, not full, not complete, but enough of a berry toll to make everyone in the room flinch except the dog. Rook suddenly barked once at the side corridor, then wheeled back to the canister. Cale understood the sequence at the same time Nora did. "It's not just unlocking," she whispered. "It's signaling." The porch keeper laughed once through split lips. "Of course it is. You think the road team left without a failsafe? If root archive opens, every remaining route gets purge order. Every child still in transfer disappears before dawn." High danger hit all at once then, not because the room got louder, but because it got mathematically worse. Open the canister, and the hidden system would finish cleaning itself somewhere else. Leave it sealed, and the one thing that could expose the full architecture of the town might stay buried forever. Cale looked at the twins. Ren's eyes were wide but steady now in the way some children become steady only after the worst thing has already happened. Mara was shaking harder, but she had not let go of her sister's hand. "Why us?" Ren asked, not crying, not pleading, just asking the one question the room had built itself to avoid. The porch keeper answered before Cale could stop her. "Because blood remembers what paper loses," she said. "Because your mother came from the wrong porch line and carried the wrong names under one body. Because if the twins were ever brought together above the root archive, the oldest record in Bitter Run would stop belonging to the county and start belonging to the dead." Cale crossed the room in 2 fast steps and hit her hard enough with the back of his hand to shut her up and rock the bench. Then he crouched in front of Ren and Mira, forcing his voice back down where it belonged. Listen to me. Whatever this thing is, it does not get to decide who you belong to. Not tonight. Rook pressed close enough that both girls could touch his harness, and that one small act steadied them more than any promise. Another metallic clunk came from inside the canister. A narrow slot opened at eye level and spit out a strip of old punched paper that curled onto the wet floor. Cale picked it up. Tiny machine print letters ran across the strip in faded ink: voice match confirmed / lineage pair present / root index lives / remaining routes purge in 1800 hours. 18 minutes. Not dawn. Not maybe. 18 minutes until whatever children, files, or bodies remained in the split system would be erased clean enough to leave only weather and county procedure behind. How many routes? Cale demanded, turning on the porch keeper again. She smiled bloodily despite the strike. Enough that you can't save them all. He almost believed her because systems like this survive by making truth too large for one night. But then Rook did something simple and perfect. He left the canister, crossed to the central vent stack, and began clawing not at the floor seam but at one iron panel half hidden behind years of soot. Cale saw the pattern instantly. The dog wasn't choosing between archive and rescue. He was telling him they connected. Cale ripped the panel open. Behind it sat a switchboard older than the county overlays, brass toggles and ceramic fuses labeled with route names his father had only partly recovered in the notes: Chapel, Culvert, Well Run, South Pasture, SCHOLHUSE, Riverhold. Beside them, under cracked glass, was one final plate: Route Master / Manual Broadcast. Mara's recorder. The patched bell line. The lantern masts. His father had not just preserved access and refuge under the farm. He had preserved the one board that could talk to all of it. Nora! Cale snapped. Bring me the recorder. She ran it over without hesitation. He looked from the old tape machine to the switchboard and saw the answer hidden in plain sight. The town had been controlled by bells, route triggers, porch assignments, and file continuity for years because whoever held the broadcast board could decide which warnings were heard and which children vanished quietly below them. The porch keeper saw him understand and finally panicked for real. No, she said, struggling against the wire around her wrists. If you send that voice to Root, the whole valley hears it. Cale met her eyes coldly. That's the point. He jammed the recorder output line into the Root master port with the help of a loose relay clip and flipped the manual broadcast toggle. Nothing happened for half a second. Then the board woke in a storm of old current. Bells pulsed somewhere under the town. Far route lights flashed. The canister locks clicked. Above all of it, Mara Turner's damaged voice burst out not just through the recorder speaker now, but through the hidden relay line itself, amplified, ghosted, broken, and everywhere at once. My name is Mara Turner. It said into the old room, into the vent stack, into St. Jude's bell cage, into the farm, the culvert, maybe the whole valley. If my brother hears this, if anyone hears this, the porches lied. The county lied. They took children through the warm place and gave them weather for a burial. Lena started crying before she knew she was crying. Nora covered Eli's ears and then took her hand away because he needed to hear it too. Ren and Mira stood rooted side by side, one clinging to the harness, one to Cale's sleeve, while Rook lifted his head and listened like even he understood that the room had finally stopped whispering. The canister's outer locks sprang open. Steam vented sideways. The lid began to turn. Then the side corridor detonated into movement. Not one operative. 3. Masked, armed, and moving at a dead run under red emergency strobes with suppressors up and zip restraints hanging from their belts. Purge team. The porch keeper screamed. Kill the board! But Rook was already in motion, hitting the first man so hard the operative fired into the ceiling and spun into the lockers. Cale fired twice, one round taking the second man in the leg, the other blowing out the route light behind the third. Lena dropped flat over Eli. Nora dragged the twins behind the bench. The broadcast board sparked but stayed alive, Mara's voice still pouring into the town even as gunfire erupted through the old room. High danger didn't arrive as panic now. It arrived as clarity. 18 minutes. Purge routes live. Road team already gone. Archive opening now. Broadcast active. Cale kicked the canister lid the rest of the way open with one brutal strike, reached inside through the steam, and found not paper but bundles of sealed microfilm canisters, original porch assignment ledgers, death substitutions, transit berths, and one black site notebook wrapped in oilcloth with his father's handwriting across the cover. Before he could pull it free, the third purge operative recovered enough to level his weapon at the twins. Cale moved on instinct, throwing himself sideways between the muzzle and the children just as the shot broke and the old room's archive spilled open beneath Mara's voice and Rook's fury. The shot struck Cale high across the side instead of center mass because he hit the floor already turning, and even then the impact felt like a steel bar swung through his ribs. He crashed into the bench line hard enough to drive the breath out of him, but the operative's second shot never came. Rook hit the man in the same instant, white fury and black harness and snapping teeth, slamming him backward into the open archive canisters so violently that ledgers, microfilm tubes, and sealed packets burst across the wet floor in a spray of paper, brass, and oilcloth. The second purge man, wounded in the leg from Cale's earlier shot, tried to crawl toward the broadcast board with a knife in one hand and a fistful of wire cutters in the other. Nora saw him before Cale did. She snatched the fallen bell striker from the floor and brought it down on the man's wrist with every ounce of fear the town had ever fed her. The cutters spun away. Lena, still half over Eli, kicked them under the bench and screamed for Ren and Mira to stay low. The third operative got his weapon level again, but Mara's amplified voice was still rolling through the old room, through the vent stack, through the patched bell line, through every hidden relay the porch keeper had spent years using to move children quietly. And the words seemed to shake him in a way gunfire hadn't. They took children through the warm place. The recording said into the room and the valley beyond. They gave them weather for a burial. The man hesitated. Cale used that half-second, came up from the floor with the crowbar in both hands, and drove it into the operative's knee hard enough to drop him screaming into the steam. Rook finished the rest by abandoning the first man the moment he stopped moving and launching at the third with terrible, disciplined force. By the time the room found its shape again, only the porch keeper was still conscious enough to make hatred look organized. Cale was bleeding through his coat, the archive canister stood open like a wound in the middle of the floor, the broadcast board sparked and hummed beside the vent stack, Mara's recorded testimony still pouring into the system, and the twins, Ren and Mira, were huddled together under the bench with Eli between them as if some part of their bodies already knew they had spent too many years being moved separately. Cale staggered to the canister and started grabbing. Not randomly. Fast, controlled, brutal tria. Original porch ledgers. Microfilm cylinders. Transit birth records. Death substitutions. County seals. Handwritten route books. One notebook wrapped in oilcloth with his father's blocky handwriting across the cover. That stopped him for one split beat. The cover read, "If route opens, take this to daylight." He shoved it into his jacket. Beneath it lay a folded map much newer than the rest, edges crisp, annotated in blue ink by somebody with field discipline and a mind for contingencies. Mason. Cale knew the handwriting before he fully admitted it. The map marked the hidden system beneath Bitter Run, but not only the routes he had already seen. It showed one more line beyond the ridge culvert, north of the town, running to the abandoned schoolhouse on the state road with one phrase written beside it so hard the pencil had cut the paper. Final paper / last clean room. Near resolution twisted the knife right there. Everything in this room mattered, yes. But it wasn't the whole of it. The system still had one place above the town where the final public version of every lie could be written cleanly enough to survive investigation. Cale! Mara's voice blasted through the relay speaker over the bell, over the wind, over panicked voices in the background. The valley heard the tape. People are running from the porches now, not to them. We've got half the county turning on each other in the road. Tell me you've got something. He keyed back, breath ragged. I've got root archive. I've got Mara's testimony. And I've got proof there's one more room. The porch keeper, bound and bloody where Lena and Nora had wired her to the bench leg, actually smiled at that through split lips. Of course there is, she said. You think towns this old keep their cleanest lies underground? Cale crossed to her in 3 limping steps and shoved the Mason map in her face. Schoolhouse. She looked at it once, then at him, and in that glance he saw exactly what still made her dangerous. Not power now. Faith. Faith that even exposed evil could survive if it reached the right paperwork by dawn. Final paper, she said softly. Births, deaths, relocations, special weather losses. The room where they make the town printable again. Wren heard that and looked up from under the bench, eyes wide and clear in Mara's face. They'll say we drowned, she whispered. Mira clutched her hand harder. Or that we never lived here. Cale wanted to tell them no, that the root archive and the ledgers and the public broadcast had already broken too much for the old lie to recover. But he knew better. Systems like this never trusted one version alone. They nested falsehoods. Local reports. County forms. Church logs. School transfers. Medical deaths. Weather losses. A town could survive the destruction of one layer if the final paper remained clean. Another hook landed fast. The damaged county radio clip to the fallen operative's vest crackled through static. Then the transfer leader's voice came through hard and clipped, no longer calm, no longer hidden. Road team status. Confirm arrival at schoolhouse. Confirm Bell child continuation and final ledger receipt. Cale looked at the map in his hand. Ridge culvert to North Road. North Road to abandoned schoolhouse. Mason on the road team. The split hadn't ended at the culvert. It had only changed vehicles. He keyed the radio without thinking. Road team compromised, he said in the flattest county tone he could fake. Need repeat on Bell child. Silence. Then, identify. Cale almost said read. Didn't. Mason's warning from earlier, half hidden beneath everything else, came back with brutal clarity. Don't trust Mason if he won't say why they kept him. So Cale chose another name. South Watch, he said. Mercer Relay. The transfer leader exhaled once, impatient, buying it enough to answer. Bell child continuation confirmed alive. Read remains useful. Final paper closes at dawn. If route broadcast spreads farther, seal the schoolhouse and burn route books. Burn route books. There it was. The road team was not simply carrying paper. It was carrying the part of the system that could still erase the surviving children and reassign the town's memory after the storm. Cale cut the line. The old room seemed suddenly too small for the amount of truth inside it. Mara's recorded voice still ran in the background, looping through statements about porches, weather lies, and hidden children. Above, St. Jude's bell was now ringing without rhythm, not an orderly warning anymore but a desperate alarm beaten by hands that had probably never expected to use it against their own town. Lena came to him first, face streaked but hardening. We go with you, she said. He shook his head immediately. No, they wrote us too, she snapped, pointing at the ledgers and brass plates. They wrote all of us. You think we stay under another room while you go make the next one matter? The anger in her voice wasn't childish. It was earned. Nora stood too, Eli rapped against her, Wren and Mira rising with her like the room had finally taught them that standing together changed the rules. Rook moved among them, checking each by scent and touch, then returned to Cale's side and looked once toward the stack ladder and once toward the north corridor. Count. Choice. Path. Always the same. Cale knelt despite the screaming pain in his side and put both hands on Wren and Myra's shoulders. Listen carefully. The schoolhouse is not a rescue route. It's a burn room. If I take you there and they see you, they stop hiding and start ending. Myra's lips trembled. Wren didn't blink. Then they'll do that anyway if you leave us. He hated that she was right enough to hurt. Mara cut across the argument through the speaker, reading the room without seeing it. Kale, the farm can't hold forever. But it can hold the kids. If you've got a path out, bring evidence and bring them here now. I'll get state eyes on anything you can hand me. State eyes. Daylight. Witness. He looked at the old room, its porches stolen and mounted, its central stack still hissing warm air, its archive canister vomiting proof onto the floor, the porch keeper bound to her own system, the children no longer hidden quietly in corners but clustered around the white shepherd who had broken every rule simply by refusing to leave one warm spot in the square. Then he looked at the Mason map. Schoolhouse. Final paper. Dawn. There was only one workable split left. Lena, Nora, take the archive and the recorder to Mara through the row 7 route, he said. Every ledger. Every plate you can carry. Ren, Mira, Eli go with you. Rook. The dog's ears lifted. Kale stopped, because the truth was harder than the order. Rook was the only thing he trusted enough to send with the children, and the only thing he trusted enough to take into the schoolhouse. The shepherd solved it by walking to Ren and Mira first, pressing his muzzle into their joined hands, then turning and coming back to stand against Kale's leg. Not because the girls didn't matter. Because the road ahead did. Lena saw it before Kale found words. We can get to the farm, she said quietly now. But you can't get through the schoolhouse without him. Mara's voice returned through static, softer this time, as if she somehow knew exactly what decision the room was forcing. Bring the dog back, she said. And bring the paper that ends them. Kale nodded once. He shoved the oilcloth notebook, the map, the latest porch ledgers, and 3 microfilm cylinders into an old county courier bag. Everything else he handed off to Lena and Nora. Ren kissed Myra's forehead once without being told to. Eli, half delirious, still reached for Rook's harness before Nora turned him gently toward the ladder. The porch keeper watched the whole thing with exhausted contempt. You won't make dawn, she said. Kale met her eyes while he clipped the courier bag under his coat. No, he said. But your story won't either. Then he and Rook turned north with Mason's map, the town's final paper waiting above the storm. Kale and Rook reached the abandoned schoolhouse just before dawn began thinking about the ridge, and the place looked exactly like the sort of building a town would stop seeing long before it stopped using it, windows boarded from the outside, flagpole bare, playground swallowed by drift. But one basement vent pushing out a thin, steady ribbon of warm air that did not belong to an empty structure. Rook froze under that vent the same way he had frozen under the cottonwood in the square, and Kale felt the circle close inside him. Same dog, same warning, same hidden breath under dead winter ground. He moved along the side wall, found the old boiler hatch half shoveled clear, and heard voices below before he saw light. The transfer leader ordering someone to finish the weather reports. A woman's exhausted voice reading names back for confirmation, papers sliding, a stamp striking, a matchbox rattling. Final paper. The room where the town made lies printable again. Kale looked at the shepherd once, and Rook answered with total certainty, body low, shoulders coiled, waiting only for the moment it would stop being stealth and become rescue. Kale opened the hatch, went down the narrow stairs in 3 controlled steps, and came into the boiler corridor just as the basement office beyond snapped fully into view. 2 county men by the door, 1 clerk at a typewriter, the transfer leader bleeding through his coat but still standing, and at the center table Mason Reed, pale from the knife wound, 1 hand braced on the records cabinet and the other holding a pistol not on Kale, but on the transfer leader. The room broke on that image. 1 guard turned. Rook hit him first, smashing him sideways into the cast iron boiler with a clang that drowned out the clerk's scream. Kale drove into the second man, slammed his wrist against the filing case until the weapon dropped, and sent him folding over the document table and a spray of route sheets and forged death forms. The transfer leader pivoted toward Mason, but Mason had already chosen, truly chosen, and fired once through the man's shoulder, pinning him back into the wall map hard enough to tear the whole district survey loose behind him. The clerk bolted for the stove where a fuel can sat uncapped, wanting to burn the room before the truth could survive it, but Kale caught her by the coat and dragged her away from the flame while Rook finished the first guard in one blur of white force and hard breath. Then, for the first time all night, there was a second of actual stillness. Papers fluttered to the floor. The boiler knocked somewhere behind the wall. Mason stood swaying by the table, gun hand shaking, face gray with blood loss and something older than pain. On the table between them lay the whole clean architecture of the lie: forged transfer orders, replacement birth certificates, weather death notices, school placement forms, county relocation memos, and on top of them all, the finished pages that would have buried the night forever if dawn had arrived 10 minutes later. One named Wren Turner deceased in storm evacuation failure. Another named Mira Hale transferred south under emergency kinship placement. Another listing Cale Turner missing during unlawful armed interference in county flood operations. The system had not merely planned survival. It had pre-written grief. Cale stared at the pages, then up at Mason. Why? Mason looked at him the way men look at the edge of a cliff they've been backing toward for years. Because the bridge wasn't an accident, he said. I found the first route books before that operation ever happened. Somebody sold the mission, buried me under the river story, and when I came up alive the county turned dead into useful. They kept me because I knew logistics, because I already understood how men disappear inside paperwork, and because Mara found me before they could move me farther. Cale said nothing. He couldn't yet. Mason went on anyway because the truth had passed the point where silence could still protect anyone. She was already pregnant. Already trying to get out. She made me swear that if they split the babies and if she died, I'd stay close enough to keep at least one alive until somebody from her blood came back mean enough to break the system. His eyes dropped for one ugly second. I wasn't strong enough to break it alone. Cale felt the old river inside him shift then, not heal, not disappear, just change current. He stepped to the table, swept the false reports aside, and found beneath them the real ledger spine, the original signatures, county disbursement notes, porch assignments, emergency route maps, and the final handover sheet carrying Wade Granger's approval mark and Sheriff Pike's witness seal. Beneath all of that sat one more envelope, older, worn soft at the corners, addressed only in Mara's hand for Cale, if the dog gets there first. That almost broke him more than the rest. Almost. But the transfer leader was still alive, still bleeding, still mean. He laughed wetly against the map wall and said, "Take the papers. Doesn't matter. Half this valley helped by shutting doors." Cale turned on him with all the stillness he had left. "Then they get to see what they helped." The leader smiled through blood. "If the school burns, they'll still call it storm damage." Mason shifted, grimacing, and with the heel of his boot kicked the fuel can away from the stove. "Not this time," he said. "State relays live." Cale looked at him sharply. Mason nodded toward an old emergency communications switchboard mounted by the office window, patched with newer county wire. "I didn't come here to save paper," he said. "I came to jam the last rewrite. Hit channel 3. Cale crossed immediately, flipped the board open, and found the outgoing line already hot. County Emergency Band, State Weather Service backhaul, Sheriff Dispatch crossover. He keyed the mic, one hand still bloody from the old room, the other on the ledgers that proved how deep the route went. "This is Cale Turner at Bitter Run Schoolhouse," he said, voice carrying into every live channel the system had once used to move children quietly. "County leadership sabotaged the flood control line, trafficked children through storm annex routes, falsified weather deaths, and is currently holding forged final paper in the schoolhouse records room. I have the ledgers. I have the names. I have living children. And I have the signed approvals." He did not know who heard first. He only knew the silence on the line changed shape. Then voices hit at once: state dispatcher, county deputy, a medic unit, somebody from road crews, somebody crying, somebody demanding Granger's status, somebody shouting that St. Jude's bell was still ringing and the whole town had gathered at the farm. Good. Let them gather. Let every porch in Bitter Run listen, while the lie lost its clean edges. The transfer leader lunged for the dropped fuel can anyway. Rook saw him before any human did and slammed him back to the floor with such force that the desk overturned onto the man's legs and left him cursing Underwood, paper, and his own finished reports. The clerk collapsed into a chair and started shaking. The second guard tried to crawl. Mason stopped him with a single look and the promise of the pistol. Then the adrenaline left room enough for pain, and Mason's knees almost gave. Cale caught him by the elbow on instinct. The old wound between them was still there, but now it had live weight in it, not memory. Mason laughed once through his teeth. "There," he said, glancing at the stack of real ledgers in Cale's arms. "Now the whole valley gets to know your dog was right." Outside, engines were already arriving, different engines now, not hidden trucks but plows, rescue rigs, sheriff units forced to respond to their own channels, private vehicles full of people who had fled the lower roads and followed the bell or the farm lights or nothing but panic uphill. The schoolhouse would not stay sealed much longer. Cale gathered the ledgers, the envelope, the forged finals, the transfer sheets, and the real route books into one canvas record sack while Rook paced once around the room, checking every body, every door, every corner, then returned to stand at Mason's side as if counting still applied even here. "Can you walk?" Cale asked. Mason looked at the blood on his own coat, then at Cale, and managed the ghost of the old dry humor. "Not well." Cale nodded. "Good enough." This time, when Mason leaned on him, Cale did not let the river answer first. They came out of the schoolhouse basement into a storm that was finally losing its shape to dawn, and below the ridge the whole valley looked rearranged by truth and weather together. The north road was jammed with county trucks, plows, ranch rigs, rescue units, and civilian vehicles abandoned half-crooked in the snow. Deputies stood with no idea which orders still belonged to them. State units were already pushing through the line. Somebody had dragged the transfer leader's remaining men from the covert truck and laid them out where everyone could see them. Bitter Run, for the first time in years, looked like a place forced to witness itself. But the thing Cale saw first wasn't the law. It was the farm. His father's ruined farm, dead orchard and sagging barn and wind-skinned house, standing above the white valley with people everywhere around it, families under blankets, medics moving, lantern masts lit, St. Jude's bells still throwing broken bronze across the snow, and children clustered near the row 7 hatch like they knew the ground itself had changed sides. Mara met them halfway down the slope, red rescue jacket torn, hair half loose, face exhausted and alive. She took one look at the record sack, one look at Mason on Cale's shoulder, and one long look at Rook with blood on his ear and frost in his fur. "You kept breathing," she said. Cale handed her the sack. "Barely." She opened the top flap just enough to see the county seals, then looked back toward the crowd around the orchard. "That'll do." Down by the hatch, Wren and Mira were already running, May and Lena behind them, Nora carrying Eli with help from the young deputy's helper, and every one of them reached Rook first. Not Cale. Not Mara. The dog. They crowded around the white shepherd with hands in his fur, on his harness, against his neck, as if the only way to trust daylight was to touch the thing that had found them before daylight came. Rook held still through all of it except for one slow pass from child to child, checking, counting, making sure every living one was still there. Only then did he press hard into Cale's leg and finally let his own weight show. Cale dropped to one knee in the snow beside him. Wren came to him next, Mira with her, and held out Mara's envelope with both hands because somewhere in the rush from schoolhouse to farm he had shoved it at Nora and it had reached the girls instead. "You open it," Wren said. His fingers shook once. Then he broke the seal. Inside was only one folded page. Mara's handwriting. No long confession. No clever explanation. Just the kind of truth people leave when they know time won't let them say it twice. "Cale, if you're reading this, then Ghost or a dog like him did what people wouldn't. I'm sorry I didn't get the girls out myself. I'm sorry I let them split us into paperwork. If you got here, don't spend the rest of your life asking why I knocked at the wrong porch. Ask why the porches learned to stay shut. Then make them open." Mara he read it once, then again, then folded it carefully and tucked it inside his coat over his heart like he finally understood what grief was for if it refused to become disappearance. Around him the farm was becoming what the town had laughed at only yesterday: shelter, evidence, command post, witness stand, last defense, all of it built on land people had called dead because they were too lazy or too frightened to learn what it was holding. State investigators came. Medics came. Cameras came. Deputies who had served Wade Granger too long lowered their eyes and started talking. Porches that had turned Cale away lit up one by one, not as shelter now but as confession, people standing in doorways, watching the farm they'd dismissed become the place that saved the valley they had nearly let drown. And through all of it, the children stayed close to Rook and to one another, not cured, not suddenly whole, but no longer hidden. By full dawn, when the storm had broken enough for the mountains to show themselves again, Bitter Run looked like a town after fire, standing in the same place, wearing the same names, but unable to pretend it was built from the same wood. Mason survived the morning. Pike didn't get to disappear into procedure. Wade Granger didn't get to use the word weather without hearing every other voice in the room answer it. Mara stood on the porch of Cale's ruined house with the ledgers under one arm and watched the rescue teams move through the orchard like she had always known the rows were really lines of defense. Ren and Mira sat in the snow with May, Lena, Nora, Eli, and the transit child, all of them pressed close around the white shepherd while Cale sat beside them with one hand on Rook's neck and Mara's note inside his coat. Turned away by every porch in town, he had followed the only thing that had never lied to him. And in the pale winter light, with the farm full of breathing people and the hidden names finally out in the open cold, Cale understood what the dog had known from the first frozen stop in the square. The warm place under the town had never been asking to stay buried. It had been waiting for somebody stubborn enough to open it.